Not every act of love is met with gratitude. That truth defines my relationship with my daughter-in-law. I never let her go without anything, yet somehow she always wanted more. More control. More of what was mine. Are you curious to hear a real, modern-day story of betrayal between a mother-in-law and her daughter-in-law? Then stay with me because I'm ready to share mine. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment below to tell me where you're listening from. Your support means more to me than you'll ever know. It was almost midnight when my daughter-in-law Bethany raised her manicured hand to stop a taxi in front of the restaurant. The rain was coming down hard, drumming against the pavement like angry fingers. She held an umbrella over her mother's head, smiled sweetly, and helped her into the back seat. "Take her to Greenfield Avenue," she told the driver. That was only 3 kilometers away, the same distance as my house, in the opposite direction. For a moment, I thought she might gesture for me to join them. Instead, she turned to me, her red lipstick still perfect, and pressed a broken umbrella into my hand. "Sorry, Cassidy," she said lightly. "There's no room left. And besides, walking will do you good. 3 kilometers isn't far, right? You'll save me the extra fare." Her mother chuckled from inside the cab. I stood there, the rain seeping into my shoes, watching as the taxi door shut with a dull thud. The car pulled away, its taillights glowing faintly through the sheets of rain, while the broken umbrella hung limply in my hand. For a moment, I simply stood still, the cold soaking through my coat. Then I smiled. Not the kind of smile Bethany was used to, but the quiet one I used to wear when a source finally slipped and told me the truth. I once spent years exposing liars on live television, revealing corruption hidden behind designer suits and gentle smiles. It seems life had handed me my final story, one that began with a fake smile and a storm. The umbrella bent backward with the next gust of wind, and the metal ribs poked through the fabric. I didn't bother to fix it. The rain felt honest against my skin, unlike the honeyed tone of Bethany's voice still echoing in my ears. Each step I took through the puddles felt deliberate, steady. 3 kilometers wasn't far at all, not when you were walking toward justice. I thought of my son Dominic, probably asleep by now, believing his wife to be kind and thoughtful. He would wake up to something else tomorrow, because tomorrow morning the world would see Bethany Lewis for who she truly was. I could already picture the TV screen, her face frozen mid-smile, while the truth scrolled beneath. I used to report the news about people like her. Now I was the one writing the headline. Some people go on television to be praised. Others go to be unmasked. When I retired at 65, people said I should be proud. After all, I'd spent 4 decades as an investigative reporter for a Cleveland news network, chasing stories that made politicians nervous and CEOs lose sleep. My name, Cassidy Ross, used to appear on the front page whenever there was a financial scandal too big to hide. I had exposed fraudulent investment firms, charities that stole from widows, and one mayor who thought public funds were his private bank. Those years shaped me. They taught me how to read lies between smiles and how to stay calm when someone tried to intimidate me. Now at 67, the applause was long gone, but I had something better: peace. My house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees. The front porch overlooked a small lavender garden that I planted myself after retirement. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I lived off a careful mix of savings, pension, and stocks I'd chosen years ago, all proof that independence didn't end with age. Every morning I brewed black coffee, opened the paper, and highlighted headlines out of habit, as if I were still preparing for a broadcast. Old habits die hard. I still kept a notebook by the window, scribbling observations the way I used to when tracking a suspect. Sometimes I wrote about the people at the grocery store, sometimes about my neighbors' changing routines. I wasn't spying. It was just the way I stayed alert, a reporter without a newsroom, still chasing truth in smaller ways. My mind needed the hunt, even if my knees no longer did. But beneath that quiet rhythm, there was a part of me that still longed for something more human. Respect, perhaps. My son Dominic used to say I was the strongest woman he knew. Lately, he said it less often. Ever since he married Bethany, I'd felt myself slipping into a different role. Not a mother, not a mentor, but a convenient wallet. I told myself it was fine that all families changed with time. Yet every time I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw a woman who had built a life through truth, now surrounded by people who used charm as currency. I wasn't naive. I could sense when someone was staging a performance. But I also knew the value of patience. After all, the best stories always began quietly before the first headline broke. Dominic Ross had just turned 38 when he was promoted to marketing director at a mid-sized tech company in downtown Cleveland. The day he told me the news, his voice trembled with excitement. I remember hugging him, proud of the man he had become. But pride can fade quickly when a son learns to stay silent to keep the peace. Dominic was kind, hard-working, and conflict-averse, a combination that made him a good employee but a poor shield against a wife like Bethany Lewis. He wanted harmony so badly that he mistook silence for love. Bethany, 35, was a vision of charm on camera. Her co-workers adored her, audiences trusted her, and brands sought her out for endorsements. She hosted morning talk shows about family values, women's empowerment, and respect for elders, the kind of glossy virtue that photographs well. Whenever she appeared on screen, people believed every word she said. They called her the model daughter-in-law. I called her a professional illusionist. Behind closed doors, Bethany's tone shifted. She had a way of lowering her voice just enough to sound reasonable when she was cruel. "Your mother means well, Dominic." She would sigh, but she's stuck in the past. It's exhausting trying to teach her modern manners. Sometimes she dropped the pretense entirely. "Face it," she told him one night, "your mother is a burden. She'll drain you dry if you let her." Dominic didn't argue. He just rubbed his forehead, muttered something about being tired, and changed the subject. In public, Bethany was all grace and laughter. She brought flowers for my birthday, posed for photos beside me, and called me Mom, loud enough for reporters to hear. But when the cameras turned off, she barely looked in my direction. She treated affection like stage lighting, bright when useful, gone when the scene ended. Every time there was a charity event or gala, she reminded Dominic not to let me speak too freely. "You know how she is," Bethany whispered with that sweet voice that fooled everyone. "She doesn't understand how modern people talk about things. We don't want her to embarrass you." Dominic would nod, smile apologetically, and promise to handle it. I never said anything. Years of journalism had taught me that silence was sometimes the best way to record the truth. They looked perfect from the outside, two professionals, with good jobs, good smiles, and a home filled with framed photos of their happiness. But perfection, like television lighting, always hides its own shadows. Lorraine Lewis entered every room like she was walking onto a stage that never truly existed. At 62, she still carried the remnants of the glamour she once believed would make her famous. In her youth, she had been a lounge singer in small Ohio bars, her voice smoky and sultry, but never strong enough to lift her out of obscurity. The dream had faded long ago, yet the performance remained. Now she lived off charm, expensive-looking clothes, bought on credit, and the attention of men who mistook her confidence for class. Her social media was her kingdom. Every post was a well-crafted illusion, photos of fancy brunches she hadn't paid for, borrowed handbags, and captions about living gracefully. At the center of that online fantasy was Bethany, her brilliant daughter, the television star who proved that Lorraine had done something right. "My baby on TV again," she'd write, followed by heart emojis and hashtags about family pride. But off-screen, Lorraine's calls to Bethany told a different story. "Sweetheart, I just need a little help this month," she'd coo through the phone. There's a charity gala and I can't show up in last year's dress, can I? You know, people talk. Bethany would sigh. Sometimes transfer the money immediately. Sometimes complain to Dominic afterward about how mom never learns. But Lorraine always got what she wanted. She knew her daughter's guilt was her greatest asset. She also knew how to handle Dominic. Whenever she visited, she greeted him with that honeyed tone, touching his arm lightly as if they were old friends. Dominic. "You're such a good husband," she'd say. Bethany is lucky to have someone who understands family values. The way she lingered on the word family made him uncomfortable, yet he always smiled and offered to pour her wine. It wasn't long before Lorraine began asking small questions about money investments, savings, Cassidy's property. Dominic, polite as always, answered more than he should have. When Lorraine discovered that Cassidy Ross held profitable stock and a stable pension, her eyes sharpened behind her mascara-thick lashes. That same evening, I overheard her whisper to Bethany in the kitchen. "You should spend more time with your mother-in-law," she said, her voice low but firm. "She won't live forever, and if you don't keep her close, someone else will benefit. Think about your future, darling. Think about your child's future." That was the moment I knew exactly where Bethany learned her performance. Lorraine had been her first audience and her best teacher. Bethany's idea of family care arrived wrapped in sweet words and rehearsed smiles. One evening over dinner, she took Dominic's hand and said she wanted to move in with me to be closer to make sure mom's comfortable, to help her with meals. I remember looking up from my plate, surprised but silent. Dominic's face lit up with hope. "That's wonderful," he said. "It'll bring the family together." He believed it. He always believed her. I just nodded, pretending to agree, though a quiet unease curled in my stomach. I'd spent decades reading human motives. Hers glowed like a headline I'd already written. Within 2 weeks, they arrived with boxes labeled Bethany's studio equipment and home office. The house that had once smelled of lavender and newspaper ink now filled with perfume and the faint hum of her phone notifications. She greeted the neighbors enthusiastically, handing out muffins she didn't bake, telling everyone how lucky she felt to take care of Mom Ross. The neighborhood adored her instantly. No one saw the way her eyes scanned every corner of my home as though she were appraising it. Dominic settled easily, believing harmony had returned. But Bethany moved differently, methodically. While unpacking, she asked casual questions about my accounts. "Do you manage your own online banking?" "Mom, I could help you organize things digitally." Her tone was gentle, her smile steady. I didn't realize then that she had already installed an app linking to my accounts through Dominic's phone, giving her quiet access to everything I'd worked for. A week later, I noticed small changes. My framed photos from the newsroom moments of my career I'd cherished disappeared from the hallway. In their place hung pictures of Bethany and Dominic laughing at the beach, their smiles bright, their arms around each other. When I asked about my photos, Bethany replied lightly, "Oh, they were gathering dust." I thought a fresh touch would make the house feel warmer. Every corner began to shift. My writing desk was moved to the basement to make space for the dining set. My favorite chair by the window vanished, replaced by a modern sofa that looked cold against the wooden floor. Even the scent of lavender was overtaken by her floral candles. I said nothing. My granddaughter, only 6, adored her mother, and I didn't want her to see bitterness bloom between adults she loved. I smiled when I had to swallow my discomfort and retreated to my room at night, where my old notebooks waited like loyal friends. I told myself I could endure this performance a little longer. After all, every act ends, and I, of all people, knew how to recognize the moment the curtain starts to fall. That night I couldn't sleep. The air in the house felt heavier than usual, filled with the faint scent of Lorraine's perfume and Bethany's laughter drifting from the living room. I had gone upstairs after dinner pretending to be tired, but the voices below kept pulling me back. When I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped. Their conversation carried clearly through the half-closed door. "All we need is to get this house in our name," Lorraine whispered. "Then we won't have to worry about money ever again." Bethany's reply came quick, sharp, confident. "It's just a matter of time, Mom. She's old, forgetful. Dominic will side with me when the time comes." For a long moment, I stood there frozen. The rain outside tapped softly against the windows, but inside I could hear my heartbeat louder than the storm. I walked quietly back to my room, each step slow, steady, deliberate. Journalists are trained to stay calm in chaos. That night, I called on every bit of that training. The next morning, Bethany entered the kitchen all sweetness and light. She carried a small box tied with a pink ribbon. "For you, Mom," she said cheerfully, placing it on the table. "Memory supplements. You've seemed so tired lately. I just want you to stay sharp." The packaging was strange. The seal on the bottle had already been broken, and the expiration label looked like it had been peeled and restuck. My instincts stirred. I smiled, thanked her, and placed the box on the counter untouched. Later that afternoon, my granddaughter Harper came skipping into the room, her voice innocent and bright. "Grandma," she said, climbing onto my lap, "Mommy says you don't need lots of money anymore. Daddy says this house will be mine when I grow up." The words hit harder than thunder. I hugged her gently, forcing a smile, but my mind spun. Children don't lie, they only repeat what they hear. That evening, I sat by the window with my old leather-bound journal, the one I'd used during my reporting days. I wrote slowly, carefully letting the pen steady my shaking hand. Maybe I wrote this old news hunter is about to begin her final investigation, not about politicians or thieves, but about her own family. I closed the journal, listened to the quiet hum of the house, and felt the familiar thrill of pursuit return. The difference this time was personal, and I knew the story would end with truth one way or another. The requests began like small cracks in a wall, harmless at first, until you realized the whole structure was shifting. One morning, Dominic appeared in the kitchen, holding a mechanic's invoice. His face was drawn, his voice careful. "Mom, my car broke down on the way to work. It's going to cost a few thousand to fix. Could you help me out for now?" I didn't hesitate. He was my son. Helping him had always felt natural. But that afternoon, as I cleared the table, I found another document tucked beneath the salt shaker, a receipt for a brand new sedan. The date on it was 2 weeks old. That night, I waited until he came home. "How's the car?" I asked. He froze for a moment, then smiled awkwardly. "It's fine now, thanks to you." He didn't notice that my eyes were fixed on the receipt beside his elbow. Years in journalism had taught me to recognize when someone was lying. Dominic didn't even try very hard. A few days later, Bethany joined the performance. She came home from the studio with a sigh loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "The network cut our funding again," she lamented, tossing her designer purse onto the couch. "If I don't invest in my own image, I'll lose everything I've worked for." She paused dramatically, then looked at me. "You understand reputation, Mom. It's everything in our industry." I did understand, just not in the way she meant. The following week, I noticed new jewelry on her wrist and luxury bags delivered to the door under her assistant's name. She called it PR expense. I called it vanity, dressed as professionalism. Then came the conversation about a small debt to friends. Dominic brought it up one evening while setting the table. "Beth and I borrowed some money from a couple we know. We just need to pay it back before it becomes awkward." When I asked who they were, how much they owed, his smile tightened. "Mom, don't worry about it. You wouldn't understand. Things work differently for younger people now." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. For the first time, I realized our family bond was no longer built on love, but on leverage. Every conversation felt like a negotiation, every hug a transaction. My home, once a place of warmth and memory, now echoed with the tone of polite deceit. That night I opened my journal. The pages smelled faintly of lavender, like the garden outside. I wrote slowly, letting each word carve through the silence. I once investigated white-collar criminals who drained companies from within, but I never thought the thief I'd have to expose one day would call me Mom. Lorraine arrived one Saturday morning, dressed as if she were attending a press conference rather than visiting family. A wide-brimmed hat, oversized sunglasses, and a perfume so strong it seemed to enter the room before she did. "Cassidy, dear," she greeted me, stretching out her jeweled hand. "I've always admired how smart you are with money. Dominic and Bethany are so lucky to have you." Her smile was as polished as her nails and just as artificial. We sat at the dining table while she poured herself coffee and began her performance. "You know," she said casually, stirring her cup, "I've been looking into some exciting investment opportunities. A boutique resort chain in Florida, very promising. If we pool our funds, both our families could benefit. I'd love for us to be partners." Her tone was smooth, rehearsed, dripping with practiced warmth. But the moment she mentioned pooling funds, a quiet alarm went off inside me. "That sounds interesting," I replied evenly. "Do you have a business plan I could review?" Lorraine blinked, her smile tightening for just a second. "Oh, Cassidy, must we make everything so formal? I thought we were family. Don't you trust me? I only want to help my daughter's future." That line, "Don't you trust me?" had ended more careers than I could count. I'd heard it from CEOs right before their empires collapsed. I smiled politely, folded my hands, and said nothing more. She changed the subject quickly, rambling about interior design and female empowerment, pretending she hadn't just attempted to borrow money under the table. A week later, while scrolling through social media, her name popped up on my feed. There she was, lounging by an infinity pool at a luxury resort, cocktail in hand, wearing a silk robe that likely cost more than my monthly pension. The caption read, "When a woman learns to enjoy life, money finds its way to her." I stared at the photo for a long moment, then quietly took a screenshot. Old instincts die hard. I might have been retired, but the reporter in me never slept. People like Lorraine always revealed themselves. You just had to wait until vanity loosened their grip on discretion. As I filed the screenshot into a private folder on my laptop, a thought crossed my mind, sharp and cold. When liars start bragging, I wrote later in my journal, that's when the evidence starts to write itself. It was a quiet evening, the kind that usually made me feel at peace. Harper sat at the coffee table, her little legs swinging as she filled in her math workbook, humming a tune from school. I was reading the paper nearby, half listening to her voice. Then she spoke without looking up. Her tone innocent, her words slicing through the calm like a knife. "Mom said when you're gone, Grandma, I'll get to live in the biggest house on the street." The pen slipped from my hand. I blinked, trying to steady my breathing. "Oh," I managed to say, keeping my voice light. "Your mom said that." Harper nodded eagerly, not sensing anything wrong. "Huh? Mom says you're old and sometimes old people forget things. Dad said you might not even remember us soon. But don't worry, Grandma, I'll still come visit you when I'm grown up." She smiled sweetly, the way only a child can, unaware that her words had just cracked something deep inside me. I forced a small laugh, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and told her to keep working on her homework. My heart, however, had already gone cold. I thought back to the memory supplements Bethany had given me last week, the bottle without a seal, the label that looked tampered with. I hadn't touched it since. That night, I picked it up from the kitchen counter and carried it to my desk. Under the lamplight, I studied the faded sticker and faint scratches around the lid. Something about it didn't feel right. I turned on my laptop and typed the name of the main ingredient into the search bar. Dozens of results appeared: medical articles, side effect lists, And one particular warning that made my stomach twist: may cause confusion, disorientation, or short-term memory loss if consumed in excess. I leaned back in my chair, the light from the screen flickering against the walls. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the old thrill of a lead, that instinct that once drove me through countless investigations. Only this time the case was inside my own home. In my journal, I wrote a single line before closing it for the night. The truth always leaves traces, even when it hides behind a child's voice. Old instincts don't die, they just wait. After that night, I felt them wake inside me, the same alertness that once kept me alive in rooms full of liars and lights. I stopped asking questions and started collecting evidence. Every morning, I sat at my desk with a cup of black coffee and reviewed my bank statements line by line. I printed every transfer, every withdrawal that didn't match my notes. I began recording dates, times, and reasons for each so-called loan Dominic or Bethany mentioned. My handwriting, once used to expose politicians, now traced the outlines of my own betrayal. One afternoon, when they both went out, I opened my drawer and pulled out a small black camera I had kept since my reporting days, the kind disguised as a clock or a button. It had gathered dust for years, but it still worked. I hid it carefully inside the large ceramic pot in the living room, right between the lavender and rosemary plants. From that spot, it had a perfect view of the couch and the desk drawer, the places where I noticed things tended to disappear. 2 days later, I decided to check my cabinet. I kept a small envelope of pension cash inside, a habit from the years before everything went digital. The envelope was gone. My fingers brushed against the empty space where it used to sit, and something cold crept through me. That evening, Dominic came home early. When I asked, he looked startled, then sighed. "Mom, I just borrowed it for Harper's tuition. I forgot to tell you. I'll pay it back next month." He said it so naturally that if I hadn't known better, I might have believed him. But the next morning, while cleaning the kitchen counter, I found a school newsletter. The tuition had been paid in full 3 months ago. The lie was small, precise, the kind told by someone who had practiced. I didn't confront him. Silence was the one skill journalism had perfected in me. Instead, I watched. I waited. I wrote. Late that night, I opened my journal and documented everything: the missing envelope, the receipts, the dates. Then I added one line at the bottom in calm, deliberate ink. I once exposed corporations that stole from thousands. Now I am investigating the smallest company of all, the family business called Ross Lewis. The cafe near City Hall was nearly empty when I arrived. The smell of roasted beans and rain on pavement mixed in the air, familiar and grounding. I chose a corner table facing the street. Old habits never fade. 5 minutes later, Maddox Reed walked in his gray suit, slightly wrinkled, his tie loose as always. He had been my ally decades ago, the lawyer who helped me untangle one of Cleveland's biggest financial scandals. Now he looked the same, sharper eyes, slower steps. "Cassidy Ross," he said, smiling as he sat down. "If you're calling me after all these years, something's wrong." I nodded, sliding a thick folder across the table. Inside were printed statements, screenshots, photographs, and my handwritten notes. "I think my daughter-in-law and her mother are trying to drain my savings," I said quietly. "Maybe more than that. There's a pattern: money disappearing, strange behavior, and recently medication that didn't look safe." Maddox flipped through the pages carefully, his lawyer's calm giving weight to every silence. "You've documented all of this yourself." "Every cent," I said. "I used to investigate people who stole from strangers. Now I'm tracking those who steal from their own blood." He exhaled slowly. "Cassidy, what you're describing could qualify as elder financial exploitation, maybe even coercion if they're pressuring you to sign anything. And if that medication turns out to be tampered with." He let the sentence hang. "Then we're looking at criminal intent." I felt my spine straighten, not from fear, but from the clarity of hearing someone finally call it what it was. Maddox leaned closer, his voice lower. "Here's what you need to do. Don't confront them yet. We'll set up a living trust in your name. It'll protect your property, your accounts, everything. If they ever try to force your signature again, it won't matter. They'll be signing into air." He took a sip of coffee, then added, almost smiling, "You always had the instincts of a journalist. Use them now. Keep documenting. Keep your cameras running. And Cassidy, yes, if you once exposed a criminal media ring," he said, his eyes glinting with something between admiration and warning, "this case will be even easier because these people don't realize you're already recording them." The rain outside had stopped. I looked at my reflection in the cafe window, the face of a woman who wasn't finished yet. The restaurant glittered like a stage. Chandeliers dripped with light music floated through the air, and a banner near the entrance read, "Celebrating family success and legacy." Bethany loved her themes. That evening she had rented the entire venue in downtown Cleveland, claiming it was for a family vlog project, a way to capture precious memories for her followers. In truth, it was another production, another episode of The Bethany Lewis Show, where every smile was rehearsed and every guest was an audience member. I arrived precisely at 7, wearing my navy blue dress and pearls, simple, dignified. The hostess led me to a table near the back, half shadowed by a floral centerpiece. From that seat, the light hit my face unevenly, while the front tables, the ones near the cameras, glowed under perfect white spotlights. Bethany and Dominic sat in the center, radiant. Cameras circled them like moths to a flame. "Mom, you made it!" Bethany exclaimed, air kissing me on the cheek without letting her lips touch. "Isn't this amazing? We're filming tonight. Just be natural, okay?" Natural. I almost smiled. Nothing about this evening was natural. Waiters glided by with champagne, and I noticed the guest list producers from her TV station, local business owners, and of course her mother Lorraine, dressed in sequins that could blind a man at 10 feet. Lorraine's laughter rose above the music, high and brittle, as she introduced herself to every camera within reach. Dominic looked genuinely happy, his hand resting on his wife's shoulder, his face glowing with pride. He had just been promoted, and this was supposed to be his night. But even from across the room, I could see that every shot framed Bethany, not him. She wasn't celebrating her husband, she was marketing her brand, the Power Family. When the speeches began, the manipulation became art. Bethany took the microphone, thanking her wonderful husband, her inspiring mother, and finally, with a smile aimed straight at the lens, her dear mother-in-law, who taught me so much about resilience. I could hear the cameraman zoom in, catching my polite nod, my careful smile. The applause that followed felt hollow, a cue rather than a response. In that moment, I saw the setup for what it was, not a celebration, but an erasure. Every detail, the seating, the lighting, even the script had been designed to make me look small, quiet, irrelevant. I sipped my champagne slowly, letting the bitterness settle. My mind, however, was already recording every word, every camera angle, every gesture. Because if Bethany wanted a performance, she had just chosen the wrong supporting actress. Bethany moved through the room like a performer in her element. With a champagne glass in hand and her camera crew following, she guided her mother Lorraine from one table to the next. Everyone, she announced, her voice bright enough to command attention. "This is my mother, my greatest inspiration, the woman who taught me how to believe in myself." Lorraine smiled on cue, waving her jeweled fingers, her sequined dress glittering under the lights. Every flash of the camera caught her perfectly, as if the evening were hers alone. I watched from my corner, hidden behind a centerpiece of roses and lilies. The laughter at the front tables drowned out the quiet clinking of my fork against the plate. Harper, My granddaughter came running from across the room and climbed onto the chair beside me. "Grandma, why are you sitting back here?" she whispered. "I can't even see you in the pictures." I smiled faintly and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. "That's all right, sweetheart. Some stories aren't meant to be photographed." A few minutes later, one of the local reporters, a young woman I vaguely recognized from the network, approached Bethany with her microphone. "You've spoken so warmly about your mother," she said politely. "But what about your mother-in-law? She's here tonight too, isn't she?" Bethany's smile froze for half a second. Then she tilted her head and laughed softly. "Oh, you mean Cassidy?" "She's just my husband's mother," she replied, her tone airy, dismissive. "She's not really connected to the media world, so she prefers to stay out of the spotlight." The words landed like a slap, quiet but sharp. Around the room, a few heads turned toward me. I could feel their eyes pause, sympathetic, curious, embarrassed on my behalf. I kept my gaze steady, lifting my glass slightly, as if toasting no one in particular. It was a trick I'd learned long ago. Never let humiliation see your tears. Lorraine, meanwhile, was in her glory. She accepted compliments and gifts with theatrical grace, laughing too loudly at every joke. A group of older businessmen surrounded her, and I noticed the way she touched their sleeves as she spoke, her charm oiled and deliberate. When she clinked glasses with one of them, a photographer nearby leaned in closer, sensing something worth capturing. Cameras shifted, focus lights brightened, and for the first time that night, Lorraine looked startled, her polished act cracking just slightly under the scrutiny. I sat back and exhaled, my hand resting on Harper's shoulder. Masks, I thought, always slip fastest under bright lights. The murmur of conversation filled the restaurant, but a sudden ripple moved through the crowd when Anna Pierce walked in. Even after all these years, she had the same sharp presence, the kind that made people lower their voices without knowing why. Anna had been one of the finest investigative editors in Cleveland, my former colleague and friend, the woman who once taught me that truth doesn't knock twice. Tonight, she was here on assignment covering a feature titled Women in Media. That was her official reason, at least. But when our eyes met across the room, I knew better. Bethany spotted her almost instantly. Her expression shifted surprise first, then excitement. She stood up so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. "Anna Pierce." "Oh my God, I can't believe it's really you. I've followed your work for years. You're such an inspiration to women in this industry. If there's ever a chance, I'd love to collaborate with you." Anna smiled politely, the kind of smile that said everything while revealing nothing. "Perhaps that chance is closer than you think," she said, her tone calm, deliberate. "And I have a feeling the audience will be very interested in you more than you might expect." Bethany laughed, missing the undertone completely. She turned back toward her camera crew, waving for them to start recording again, convinced she'd just charmed a legend. I watched the interaction from my seat. My fingertips pressed lightly against the rim of my glass. Anna's words weren't random. They were a signal, quiet but clear. A moment later, Anna's gaze drifted toward the back of the room where two cameramen were adjusting their tripods. She gave the smallest nod in their direction. I followed her line of sight and noticed the small logo on their badges, the local network's legal department. These weren't Bethany's hired videographers. These were Anna's. The footage they were gathering tonight wasn't for a lifestyle vlog. It was evidence legitimate, time-stamped, and admissible. When Anna's eyes met mine again, she tilted her head ever so slightly, a gesture only an old colleague would recognize. I nodded back, calm on the outside, though my pulse had picked up. For the first time in weeks, I felt the familiar rush of control returning. Whatever game Bethany thought she was playing, the rules had just changed. I looked at my reflection in the champagne glass, steady, composed. The hunter in me was awake again. The laughter in the room grew louder as the champagne kept flowing. Somewhere near the center table, a red-faced businessman, one of Lorraine's admirers, raised his glass and called out over the music. "Bethany," he slurred, grinning wide, "I'd love to make a donation to that charity of yours. What's it called again? The one you manage so brilliantly." The room quieted just a fraction. Bethany blinked, her smile faltering for the briefest second. "Oh, that," she said, laughing too brightly. "It's just a small initiative, really. We're still sorting out some paperwork." Anna Pierce. Ever, the journalist leaned forward from her seat, her tone mild but cuttingly precise. "You mean Sun Hope Relief, right?" she asked casually, as though she were simply joining the conversation. "Interesting. I heard the Bureau's been looking into that organization for some financial irregularities." The sound of forks against plates stopped. The businessman froze mid-laugh. For a heartbeat, even the music seemed to hesitate. Bethany tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked at the edges. "Oh, that's a misunderstanding, I assure you." Her hand trembled as she lifted her wineglass, but before she could steady it, red liquid splashed down onto Lorraine's glittering silver dress. Lorraine gasped audibly, dabbing at the stain, her face draining of color. Her composure shattered for just a second, enough for the cameras nearby to capture it all. Anna's cameramen didn't move or speak, but their lenses turned in unison, focusing sharply on the mother and daughter. Every twitch, every forced smile, every flicker of panic was immortalized in high definition. From my corner, I didn't say a word. I simply stirred my tea, the faint clink of the spoon against porcelain somehow louder than the room's uneasy silence. Harper, sitting beside me, watched curiously. I raised my cup and smiled at her. "Cheers, sweetheart," I whispered. She giggled and clinked her juice glass against mine. When people are afraid, I murmured low enough for only her to hear, they reveal the truth long before anyone asks for it. I took a slow sip, the warmth of the tea grounding me as chaos rippled quietly across the room. Around us, the perfect image Bethany had spent years curating was beginning to crack, and the best part was the cameras were still rolling. It started with a small, stubborn thought that wouldn't go away, the kind that had launched every major story of my career. A few days before Bethany's birthday gala, I overheard her chatting on the phone in the kitchen, bragging about her charity, Sun Hope Relief. She spoke quickly, using the same practiced tone she used on camera. "We're expanding the fund this quarter," she said. "People trust me to handle donations personally." Later that evening, while making tea, I turned on the television. A local news segment flashed across the screen, an old report on a financial scandal involving a nonprofit accused of laundering money under the name Sun Hope Relief International. The logo was the same, down to the stylized golden sunburst. My pulse quickened. I knew logos didn't get reused by accident. Memories began to line up like headlines in my mind. Over the past year, Bethany had asked me 3 separate times to transfer money into her personal account for emergency disaster relief. She'd framed it as a kind gesture, helping storm victims, wildfire survivors, single mothers. But when I'd asked about donation receipts or IRS confirmation letters, she'd brushed it off with a laugh. "Oh, Mom, I handle it all directly. It's faster that way. The red tape is endless." I had believed her, or perhaps I had chosen to. That night, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up an old email folder. Months ago, Bethany had shared her login so I could help her organize nonprofit paperwork. She had likely forgotten that. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before typing in the password. When her inbox opened, the truth unfolded line by line. There were hundreds of messages: elderly donors, widows, people thanking her for making them feel useful again. Attached were screenshots of wire transfers, sometimes just a few $100s, sometimes tens of thousands. I read one from a 73-year-old man who wrote, "You restored my faith in humanity, Bethany." I hope my little contribution helps someone in need. My stomach turned. These weren't supporters, they were victims. The scent of lavender drifted in from the garden, grounding me as I clicked through the evidence. My hands didn't shake. They never did when I smelled a lie this big. I began saving every email, labeling folders by date, compiling amounts and names. Each click felt like muscle memory returning. When I finally closed the laptop, I whispered to the empty room, "This isn't a family matter anymore." I reached for my journal and wrote the words that sealed my resolve. This is a media scam, and I'm going to expose it. The small cafe across from the courthouse hadn't changed in 10 years. The same cracked leather booths, the same soft hum of jazz from a dusty speaker. Cassidy arrived first, choosing the corner table by the window, the one where she and her old team had once mapped out investigations that shook half the city. The smell of coffee and rain made her feel both nostalgic and alive again. A few minutes later, Anna Pierce walked in her trench coat, still damp from the drizzle outside. Her presence was the same as ever, sharp, calm, and quietly commanding. She spotted Cassidy, immediately offered a knowing smile, and slid into the seat across from her. "I figured it was only a matter of time before you called," Anna said, removing her gloves. Cassidy reached into her bag and placed a thick folder on the table. "I think my daughter-in-law is running a fraudulent charity operation. The name's Sun Hope Relief, and I believe it's connected to the same network that was laundering funds a few years back." Anna's expression shifted from curiosity to focus. She opened the folder and scanned the first few pages: printed emails, donation records, screenshots of transfers. "You kept everything." "Every trace," Cassidy replied. "These are copies of her emails, bank references, and transfers she made in the name of charity." Most donors are elderly or widowed. They think they're saving lives, but their money's vanishing into her account. Anna exhaled, eyes narrowing as she flipped through the documents. "This isn't just a family scandal, Cassidy. You're describing a modern kind of fraud using moral branding to gain public trust. Women helping women, influencers with integrity. It's brilliant in its deception and dangerous." Cassidy nodded. "That's exactly what scares me. She's built a saint's image while quietly draining people's savings. If she keeps going, she won't stop with strangers. She'll come after everything I own next." Anna leaned back, already thinking aloud. "We'll need 2 tracks. I'll trace the public side, her media appearances, sponsors, donation channels. You'll stay inside, observe, collect everything that happens in real-time: receipts, conversations, anything suspicious." "And Maddox?" Cassidy asked. "He'll cover the legal front," Anna replied. "Once we have enough, he can secure a warrant, maybe even a freeze order if we prove intent." For a moment, the two women sat in silence, letting the plan settle between them like an unspoken oath. Then Anna smiled faintly, that old fire flickering in her eyes. "Feels familiar, doesn't it? 2 journalists chasing truth again." Cassidy smiled back, her voice steady. "Only this time the headline's personal." I sat across from Maddox Reed in his dimly lit office, the blinds half closed against the gray light of Cleveland's late afternoon. He flipped through the folder I had brought, his sharp eyes scanning each page, the transfers, the emails, the notes I had written in the margins. For several long minutes, he didn't say a word. Then he looked up and said quietly, "Cassidy, what you have here isn't just a family matter. This could qualify as federal wire fraud and elder financial exploitation under Ohio law." I felt my stomach tighten. Even though I had expected those words, hearing them out loud made everything real. Maddox leaned forward, tapping one of the pages with his pen. "These repeated transfers into her so-called charity account, and the way she's been taking money directly from donors, this pattern is clear. If the federal investigators take this case, they'll treat it seriously." He turned toward his computer, his tone becoming all business. "Here's what you need to do. Keep every single piece of evidence. Print out every email, every bank statement, every receipt. Save your recordings to a separate hard drive, one that's never connected to Wi-Fi. Label everything with dates and times. Chain of custody matters more than you think. I nodded slowly. His voice reminded me of my old newsroom editor firm, Patient Precise. I took notes while he continued. And don't alter your recordings. Courts won't accept anything edited. Keep them raw, even if the sound isn't clear. Then Maddox picked up the phone and dialed from memory. I watched as his fingers moved calmly, efficiently. I'm reaching out to the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force, he said. They can authorize a monitoring order on Sun Hope Relief's accounts. Once we have enough data, I'll request a warrant to freeze her connected wallets. That'll stop her before she can hide the funds. I sat quietly staring at the edge of his desk. And what do I do now? I asked finally. He looked straight at me, his voice dropping low. You stay silent, Cassidy. Don't confront anyone. Don't warn your son. If Dominic knows too soon, he'll tell her maybe by accident. And if Bethany suspects anything, she'll wipe everything clean before we can act. The words hit hard. The thought of keeping this from my own son felt like swallowing stones. But I understood. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about precision, about timing, about justice. Maddox must have seen the conflict on my face because his tone softened. You've already done the hardest part, admitting what's happening. Now you let the system do the rest. I gathered the folder, stood up, and fastened my coat. Then let's make sure she never sees it coming. He smiled faintly. That's the reporter I remember. The investigation grew faster than I imagined, like a story that had already started writing itself. Anna Pierce moved with the same precision I remembered from our old newsroom days, except now she had an entire investigative team under her command. Within a week, her reporters were shadowing Bethany and Lorraine at every public appearance, charity brunches, brand events, networking galas. They blended in easily, pretending to be new interns or freelance photographers. I watched from the sidelines, quietly feeding Anna the timeline and names I had gathered. Every night we exchanged coded emails. She'd write, "The garden is blooming," whenever her team captured something valuable, and bloom it did. On Friday, she sent me a secure link, the first solid piece of evidence. In the video, Bethany stood behind a stage backdrop at a media luncheon, her perfect smile replaced by tight impatience. Lorraine appeared moments later, clutching an oversized purse. She glanced around, lowered her voice, and whispered, "Here. Move it fast before they start asking where the funds came from." Then she slipped a stack of cash bound by a golden clip into Bethany's handbag. The camera angle was steady, professional, discreet. I could almost feel my old instincts flare to life again. I replayed the clip 3 times. The words, the gestures, the exchange, it was enough to destroy her public image. But Anna wasn't rushing. She was building a case, not just a scandal. "We'll air it Monday," she said over the phone that night. Her tone was calm, surgical. The segment's called "When Kindness is Exploited, Unmasking a Fake Charity in Media Circles." It's not just about Bethany. It's about every influencer who hides greed behind virtue. The footage will go through legal review. First Maddox has already cleared the procedure. I sat in the dark, the hum of the city faint through my kitchen window. I could see the plan forming clearly now. 2 layers of justice moving at once, the law tightening its grip quietly from one side, and the media preparing to expose her publicly from the other. Part of me ached at the thought of Dominic seeing the broadcast. But another part, the part that had written front-page stories and stared down liars, knew this was the only way. The truth, once aired, couldn't be buried again. They came home late that night, Dominic and Bethany laughing too loudly for the hour, their voices blurred by wine and arrogance. The air filled with the mix of expensive perfume and red wine, the scent of a life lived for display. I sat in the dark of the living room, the lights off, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only sound besides their footsteps. They didn't notice me there, they never did. To them, I was part of the furniture, invisible, silent, harmless. I waited until their bedroom door shut and the house fell quiet again. Then I opened my laptop. The blue light washed over my face, steady, unshaken. On the screen sat a single folder labeled Sun Hope Evidence, Final. Inside were the audio recordings, the bank statements, and the video clip Anna's team had captured. Behind the stage, Lorraine handing over the cash, Bethany whispering about moving it fast. Every file was time-stamped, verified, and ready. I attached the folder to an encrypted email and typed one final note to Maddox. Let the law do the rest. Then I hit send and closed the laptop with a calm, deliberate motion. No tremor in my hands, no second thoughts. I had done what I came to do. Before bed, I sat at my desk and opened my leather-bound journal. The same one I'd used for years, the one that held pieces of every investigation I'd ever chased. Tonight's entry was short, measured, final. Tomorrow I will let justice speak. No arguments, no tears, only truth. The pen left a small indent where I stopped writing. I placed it down, folded my reading glasses, and turned off the desk lamp. The house was still. Outside, rain began to fall again, steady, rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock counting down to morning. As I passed through the living room, the TV glowed faintly in the dark. Bethany must have left it on. A news promo played the words, "Breaking news, truth behind the mask," flashing across the screen, accompanied by a short clip of a blurred woman's silhouette, her voice distorted. My lips curved into a small, controlled smile. I poured myself one last cup of tea, inhaling the calm scent of chamomile. The warmth steadied me. Tomorrow would bring noise, headlines, cameras, lawyers. But tonight belonged to silence. Now I whispered to the empty room, it's their turn to tremble. The rain came down in sheets that night, thick and merciless, drumming against the marble steps outside the restaurant. The party had ended hours ago, but the laughter still echoed faintly from the curb where Bethany stood, one manicured hand waving as she helped her mother Lorraine into a taxi. Cameras had followed them earlier, flashing like lightning. Now the only flashes left came from the storm itself. Lorraine turned back before stepping into the car, her sequined shawl glittering under the streetlights. "Come on, sweetheart," she said to Bethany, her voice sharp with pride. "Let the poor woman get some exercise. Humility builds character." She laughed, the sound as brittle as glass. Bethany smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that had fooled millions on screen, then reached into the trunk of the taxi and pulled out an old umbrella, the one with a broken rib and a torn edge. She handed it to me like a prop. "It's pouring, Mother. You should walk home. The taxi's too expensive. Old people need movement, right? Keeps the heart young." I looked at her for a long moment, her flawless makeup shining even in the rain, her arrogance blooming like perfume in the wet air. Lorraine slid into the back seat, already checking her reflection in a compact mirror. Bethany closed the taxi door with a soft click, her laughter joining her mother's as the car pulled away into the night. I stood there alone on the sidewalk holding the broken umbrella. When I opened it, the wind tore it backward, instantly drenching my face and hair. The cold hit me hard, but I didn't move. For a moment, the headlights of the departing taxi reflected in the puddles around my feet, framing me in streaks of gold and gray. It might have looked pitiful to anyone watching a drenched old woman with a useless umbrella. But inside, something colder than rain had already settled, calm, final, unstoppable. The storm raged louder, thunder rolling over the city. I tilted my head upward, feeling the water run down my cheeks like something purer than tears. My voice came out quiet, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the night like steel. "You're right," I said to the empty street. "I don't report the news anymore." I closed the broken umbrella, its metal ribs creaking in my hand, and looked toward the dark horizon where the taxi's lights had disappeared. But tomorrow, I murmured, a faint smile curling at the edge of my lips. someone will watch the story. When I returned home that night, my clothes clung to me like the storm itself. I dried my hair with a towel, changed into my robe, and lit the small lamp by the kitchen window. The rain was still falling outside, steady and relentless, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. I took a slow breath, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder I had prepared, the one labeled Sun Hope, Final Proof. Inside was everything: the video of the gala, the clip showing Lorraine handing Bethany the cash, the audio of her whisper, "Move it fast before they ask where it came from." I watched it one more time, making sure the sound was clear, the timestamp visible, the file complete. Then I attached it to an email addressed to Anna Pierce and hit send. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. Only calm. Minutes later, my laptop chimed. A new message from Anna appeared. She didn't write a paragraph, not even a headline, just a single sentence that made my throat tighten. "It's enough. We air it tomorrow morning." The umbrella. Our old code from years ago, back when we used to hide breaking news stories under weather metaphors to throw off nosy editors. It meant, the storm is ours now. I smiled faintly. Outside, thunder rolled again, but it no longer sounded like warning. It sounded like applause. A few minutes later, another email arrived, this time from Maddox Reed. His message was formal, succinct, and heavy with consequence. Confirmed. Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. 1343, wire fraud. Local authorities notified. Temporary arrest warrant in motion. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. The glow of the screen faded, leaving the room bathed in the soft gold light of my lamp. I poured myself a cup of green tea, the steam curling upward in slow, graceful ribbons. The storm outside hadn't stopped. Wind lashed the windows, rain streaked down the glass in crooked lines. But through it all, I could sense the shift. The night was thinning, the air was changing. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the first trace of dawn was waiting. I sat quietly, hands wrapped around the warm cup, watching the rain slide off the window pane. For the first time in months, I felt no weight in my chest. Justice was already awake, and by morning, the world would be too. At exactly 7 o'clock that morning, the world woke up to my story. The television in my living room flickered to life as the opening notes of the morning news theme played confident, serious final. Across the country, every major channel cut to the same broadcast: breaking news TV producer and her mother arrested in charity fraud scandal. The headline scrolled in bold red letters, slicing through the stillness of dawn. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea between my hands, watching the truth unfold. The screen cut to the footage from the gala, the same video I had sent to Anna Pierce. Bethany was there, flawless under the stage lights, her laughter perfectly timed for the cameras. Then came the damning moment, her hand reaching for the envelope, Lorraine's gleaming smile as she winked at the fake sponsor. The sound captured every careless word, every false note of glamour. And then the shift. The door opened behind them, and uniformed officers entered the frame. Bethany froze. Lorraine turned pale. The guests gasped as the cameras rolled on. Anna's voice came next, calm and cutting as ever. She appeared live in the newsroom, her gray hair tied back neatly, her eyes steady on the lens. "Justice has many forms," she said. Her tone measured, her words crisp. Today, it arrived through a staged celebration, a reminder that deceit can only wear a mask for so long. The studio cut back to the field. Reporters surrounded the restaurant where the arrest had taken place just hours earlier. Flashbulbs exploded like lightning as Bethany was led out in handcuffs, her designer dress soaked in rain and humiliation. Lorraine stumbled behind her, shouting something about a misunderstanding, but no one was listening. The story had already moved beyond their control. For a moment, the camera caught Bethany's face, half covered by her shaking hands, mascara bleeding under the harsh light. She looked nothing like the poised anchor the audience once admired. The chyron beneath her image read simply, "Former TV host, faces federal charges." I leaned back in my chair, silent. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first sunlight broke through the clouds. I took a slow sip of tea and let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The truth was no longer mine to tell. It belonged to everyone now. And as the broadcast ended, I whispered to myself, "The storm has passed. Now let them stand under their own rain." The morning started like any other until the voice on the car radio shattered everything I thought I knew. I was driving to work, coffee in one hand, my mind already on the meeting I was supposed to lead at 9. Then the announcer's tone changed, urgent, heavy. "Breaking news this morning. Television producer Bethany Lewis and her mother Lorraine Lewis have been arrested on charges of charity fraud and wire manipulation. More details to come." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The sound of my wife's name on the radio didn't feel real. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as the car drifted toward the shoulder. "No," I whispered to no one. "That can't be right. It's a mistake. It has to be a system error." My voice trembled, breaking apart between denial and panic. By the time I reached the office, the story had already exploded across every screen. In the lobby, a crowd had gathered around the giant monitor where the live broadcast played. There she was. Bethany, my wife. My pride, the face of every corporate event I'd ever brought her to. Only now she wasn't smiling for the cameras. Her wrists were cuffed, her head bowed, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. The footage replayed on a loop, each rotation cutting deeper than the last. When I stepped inside, the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward me. I could feel their pity like a physical weight pressing against my chest. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered. I wanted to disappear. Then my boss, Mr. Kavanaugh, walked over. He didn't look angry, just tired. "Dominic," he said softly, "you should take some time off. The media's all over this, and the company can't afford any exposure right now." His words were careful, but the message was clear. I was no longer an employee, just collateral damage in my wife's downfall. I nodded without arguing. My legs felt weak as I walked out of the building. The drive home blurred into patches of light and sound, traffic lights rain on the windshield, the echo of my wife's voice in my head. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked different, quieter, heavier. Through the window, I saw my mother sitting in her usual chair, folding the morning newspaper. On the front page was Bethany's face, handcuffed, surrounded by police. I stepped inside, the smell of tea and rain mixing in the air. She didn't look at me right away. She simply folded the paper neatly, placed it on the table, and said in a calm, almost gentle tone, "Son, this isn't my fault. This is your truth." For the first time, I couldn't answer her, because deep down, I knew she was right. That afternoon, the world had already calmed down, but the air around my house still felt charged, as if justice itself had left a faint electricity behind. Anna Pierce arrived just before sunset, still in her beige trench coat, holding a USB drive and a folded newspaper under her arm. She didn't knock. She never needed to. We had once chased the same kind of truths, and people like us didn't need permission to share silence. She plugged the USB into my old laptop, the screen flickering to life. On it played the national broadcast, edited, polished, complete. The anchor's voice narrated the story that had consumed the country all morning. The charity scandal, the fraudulent donations, the arrest. Each detail played out with surgical precision. When it ended, Anna turned to me and said quietly, "Congratulations, Cassidy. The story has gone national, but your name will never appear." I looked at her and smiled faintly. "Good," I said, my voice steady. "I don't need anyone to know. Justice doesn't need heroes. It only needs someone who refuses to bury the proof." She nodded, the corners of her eyes softening. For a moment, we said nothing. Two women who had seen too much of the world's lies and still chose to fight them in our own quiet ways. Not long after Anna left, my phone rang. It was Maddox. His tone, though professional, carried something warm, almost protective. "Cassidy," he said, "the police have frozen all of their accounts. Every asset tied to Sunhope and Lorraine Lewis is under investigation. Your house is secure, and the court just granted you temporary guardianship of Harper." I closed my eyes. The tension that had lived in my chest for months finally loosened, dissolving into a deep, quiet relief. "Thank you, Maddox," I said softly, "for handling the law while I handled the storm." That night, the world outside was calm again. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and wet soil. I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, a cup of tea steaming beside me. The television inside flickered through the open door, replaying the evening news, the same broadcast, now reshared by every network in the country. I didn't need to hear the words again. The images were enough, the light of truth spreading through 1,000 living rooms. The lavender swayed gently in the wind, their purple heads glowing under the pale wash of the TV light. I whispered to the night, almost smiling, the final story of my life turned out to be the truest one. The next morning, the city woke to headlines that cut through every breakfast table, every radio, every television in America. Breaking news TV editor Bethany Lewis and mother under federal investigation for charity fraud. The words rolled across the screen, sharp and cold. Justice had a way of finding its voice, and today it spoke louder than any broadcast Bethany had ever produced. The footage replayed everywhere, the gala lights, the glittering champagne glasses. Bethany smiling as she accepted the envelope. Lorraine laughing, her hand brushing the arm of the fake sponsor. Then the moment everything shifted, their faces twisting from pride to panic as officers entered the room. The clip ran in loops across national media, stripped of all the polish Bethany once controlled. Her own world of performance had turned into evidence. News anchors discussed the case with the same practiced tone she used to deliver others' scandals. Authorities have frozen all Sunhope relief accounts, along with the personal assets of Bethany and Lorraine Lewis, one said. Preliminary estimates indicate over $450,000 in misappropriated funds. I watched it all unfold from my living room, the sound low, the tea cooling in my hands. There was no satisfaction in watching them fall, only a quiet certainty that the truth had finally spoken. Lorraine's jewelry, Bethany's designer dresses, their endless facade of morality, all of it was now evidence. Then on the screen, a familiar face appeared. Maddox Reed. He stood at a press podium outside the courthouse, wearing his signature gray suit, his voice calm and measured. "This investigation began with an anonymous tip," he said, pausing just long enough for meaning to settle. "A source who once served the public as a veteran investigative journalist." He didn't need to say my name. The people who had followed my work for years didn't need confirmation. In retirement communities, coffee shops, and small-town living rooms, older viewers leaned forward, recognizing the quiet style of exposure, methodical, factual, merciless in its truth. Some of them smiled, nodding to themselves, murmuring, "That must be Cassidy Ross." By noon, every major outlet had picked up the story. The same newsrooms that once ignored corruption now aired my proof on repeat. And somewhere behind prison glass, Bethany would be watching too, the woman who once silenced others, now forced to listen. For me, it wasn't revenge. It was restoration, the balance that the law at its best still knows how to keep. They said the scandal broke at sunrise, but for me, it broke much earlier, the moment I saw what blindness had done to my son. That morning, Dominic's voice came through the radio before the newscaster even finished reading the charges. His tone was trembling hollow. "I didn't protect my mother from my own family," he said during a press interview. Hearing those words, my hands froze on the teapot. I had waited years for him to see the truth, but not like this. Not with his whole world collapsing around him. By afternoon, 2 detectives came by to deliver papers about the financial investigation. Dominic wasn't home yet. When he finally arrived, I knew something had changed. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped as if carrying invisible stones. He told me Bethany had emptied their joint accounts, every dollar gone. She left only debt credit card statements and a subpoena. The woman he had trusted, defended, and sacrificed for had taken everything. He sat at my kitchen table that evening, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't scold him. I simply poured him tea and said quietly, "Some storms don't destroy us, son. They wash the lies away." He didn't answer, but tears slipped down his face, silent and ashamed. In the following days, the press surrounded him like vultures. His company asked him to take voluntary leave to protect their image. I watched him shrink, not from weakness, but from guilt. He sold the car, left their house, and moved into a small apartment with little Harper. I saw them sometimes from afar at the grocery store, him holding her tiny hand, trying to learn what fatherhood meant when all illusions were gone. He never came inside my house. Not yet. But one morning, about a month later, I opened my door and found a bouquet of lavender lying on the porch. The flowers were tied with twine, still damp with morning dew. Beside it was a folded note written in his handwriting, familiar, careful, a little shaky. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," it read. "I just want to start again, this time with the truth." I stood there for a long while, holding that piece of paper, feeling both the ache and the quiet grace inside those words. My son had finally opened his eyes, not because I had forced him to, but because truth had found him in its own time. I placed the lavender in a vase on the table right beneath the window, where the sunlight reached every morning. For the first time in months, I felt peace, not because I had won, but because he had finally learned. Blind love had broken him, but the truth. Lorraine always believed she could outsmart everyone. When the police issued a warrant for her arrest, she vanished from Ohio overnight, leaving behind nothing but unpaid hotel bills and her half-empty closet. For 3 days, the authorities lost her trail until she made the same mistake that had defined her life, the need to be seen. That Sunday morning, her social media page lit up with a new post. A selfie, filtered and bright, showing her lounging beside a turquoise pool in Florida. The caption read, "New beginnings deserve sunshine." She even tagged the resort location. Within an hour, investigators traced the metadata, confirmed the geolocation, and surrounded the property before she'd even finished her mimosa. Vanity had always been her trademark, and now it was her confession. The news broke by noon. Television anchors replayed her old photos, the designer handbags, the champagne on rented yachts, the carefully posed charity galas. The same images she once used to craft a life of glamour were now displayed as evidence of misappropriation of public funds and fraudulent enrichment. What she thought were trophies had become proof. Every sparkle, every label, every smile was a record of deceit. When they brought her out of the hotel in handcuffs, Lorraine screamed at the cameras, mascara running down her face. "I just wanted to live beautifully," she cried, her voice shrill against the flash of lights. The reporters didn't look away. Some even smiled. That night, social media flooded with comments. "The false beauty has finally peeled off its own mask," one user wrote. She wanted the spotlight, now she has it. I watched the footage quietly from my living room, the lavender outside swaying in the wind. There was no anger left in me, only recognition. People like Lorraine always believed image could replace integrity. They lived for applause, not truth. And in the end, it was that need to be adored that betrayed her. Anna Pierce published her column the next morning in the Cleveland Chronicle. The title read, The media world doesn't collapse from lies. It collapses from greed wearing morality's mask. Her words struck deep. I folded the newspaper slowly, thinking how accurate it was, not just about Lorraine, but about every person who used goodness as decoration. Lorraine's downfall didn't require revenge or exposure. She did it herself, one photo at a time. When the case finally closed, the world wanted a face for justice, but I refused to become one. Reporters showed up at my gate for days, microphones and cameras, ready hoping for a soundbite they could spin into a headline. I opened the door only once. Justice doesn't need decoration, I said calmly. It only needs truth and time. Then I closed the door and went back to pruning my lavender. Fame was never the goal. Peace was. So I moved back to my old house, the one untouched by pretension. The wooden porch creaked the same way it had 20 years ago. The garden smelled of lavender and mint, and the air no longer carried the weight of lies. Harper came to live with me soon after her laughter filling corners that had been silent for too long. She would run barefoot through the garden while I hung laundry or brewed tea, her small hands brushing the purple flowers as if testing their softness. In her presence, the world felt new again, untainted. A few weeks later, Maddox invited me to his office for the final settlement meeting. He had the familiar look of someone trying to convince me to celebrate. "Cassidy," he said gently, "you're entitled to all of it. The restitution totals the full amount they stole, $450,000. It's yours." I smiled, shaking my head. "I only need enough to live comfortably," I said. "The rest should go where it's needed to elder voice." He blinked in surprise. "The Foundation for Financial Abuse Victims." I nodded. "There are many like me, Maddox, but not all of them have a pen, a camera, or a voice loud enough to be heard." He sat back, quietly, impressed. "You never stop writing headlines, do you?" he teased. "Only the true ones," I answered, smiling faintly. That night back home, I opened my old leather journal, the same one that had carried every note, every suspicion, every heartbeat of this storm. I wrote slowly, the ink soaking into the paper like a quiet oath. I don't need anyone to see me win. I only need them to know that truth never loses. I closed the journal and placed it beside the window, where the light from the garden spilled in through the lace curtain. Outside, the lavender swayed gently in the evening breeze, its scent mingling with the cool air. Somewhere in the distance, a news anchor's voice echoed faintly from a neighbor's TV, another story, another noise. But mine was finished. Justice had spoken. I had no desire to speak louder than it. Harper moved in a month after everything ended. She was 10, bright, curious, and already carrying questions too big for her age. The house felt alive again the day she arrived, her small backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes darting around the garden, as if the lavender itself were whispering secrets to her. From that morning on, silence no longer ruled my home. Every sunrise became our ritual. We'd sit at the kitchen table with toast jam and 2 cups of tea, one for me, one mostly milk for her. I'd open the newspaper and she'd lean closer, reading headlines aloud with the kind of seriousness only a child could manage. "Bye," she asked one morning. "How do we know which stories are true?" I smiled. "By asking the questions others are afraid to ask," I told her. "And by never letting comfort feel more important than honesty." She nodded, pretending to take notes on a napkin. I didn't tell her, but in that moment, she looked more like me than I ever expected. When the lessons from the paper were done, we moved to the garden. The lavender was in full bloom, its color deep and steady, the air thick with scent. I gave her a small trowel and a pair of gloves too big for her hands. "The garden is a lot like journalism," I said, as we worked side by side. "You have to dig carefully, not carelessly. You water what's true and pull the weeds of deceit before they take over." She laughed, wiping soil across her cheek. So the flowers are the truth? I nodded. And the weeds are the lies. Sometimes she'd pause watching me closely, as if memorizing my movements. Other times she hummed while planting seeds, her tune rising and falling with the wind. She was growing not just taller, but deeper, more thoughtful. At night, I'd find her at the small desk by the window, writing in the journal I'd given her on her first day here. One evening, I peeked inside after she'd gone to bed. In her careful, looping handwriting, she had written, "Grandma says justice is like a flower, you have to water it with truth, not with tears." I closed the book softly and turned off the lamp, my heart both heavy and light. I had spent my life fighting to expose truth. Now I realized my greatest story wasn't something I had written, it was someone I had raised. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It simply arrives quiet as rain, steady as truth. That morning, sunlight poured softly through the kitchen window as I brewed a pot of tea. The lavender outside was blooming again, its scent drifting in with the breeze. I turned on the television out of habit. The morning anchor's voice carried the kind of warmth reserved for rare good news. Authorities confirmed that an elderly woman's anonymous tip helped dismantle a major charity fraud ring. Investigators describe her as calm, sharp, and remarkably brave. I smiled, stirring honey into my cup. The tea swirled golden and clear. I used to be a reporter, I murmured to myself. But this time I wrote the story with my own life. An hour later, I heard a car door close outside. Dominic's familiar footsteps approached the porch. When he entered, Harper ran ahead of him, clutching a small bouquet of lavender. "Grandma," she said, her voice bright, "we came to thank you." Dominic stood behind her, eyes lowered, his face marked by both shame and resolve. "Mother," he began softly, "I want to start again. If you'll let me." I set my teacup down, meeting his gaze. "When you learn how to protect others from greed," I said gently, "then come back. I'll be here." He nodded, tears flickering at the edge of his lashes. He wasn't the same man who once looked away from truth. Perhaps none of us were. Harper climbed into my lap, her hands still smelling faintly of lavender and ink. "Grandma," she said, her eyes shining, "I'm going to be a reporter like you." I laughed quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Then promise me one thing," I said. "Write only what you believe and never let anyone buy your silence." She nodded solemnly, as if sealing a vow. Outside, the wind stirred the garden, carrying the scent of lavender across the yard. The broken umbrella from that stormy night still leaned against the porch railing. I hadn't thrown it away. Its bent ribs and torn fabric were reminders that even fragile things could survive the rain and tell their own kind of story. I poured another cup of tea, the steam curling like quiet breath. The TV still murmured in the background, but I no longer needed to listen. My story had already ended, and yet somehow it was only beginning again through her. Sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. All it takes is a broken umbrella and a calm, knowing smile. If you've ever been dismissed because of your age, don't stay silent. Justice may move slowly, but it always arrives right on time.